what are they saying? It's like a post-truth world or something.
It shows the BBC is fake news.
Can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim.
What a headline portrays and what actually has happened.
They thought they could easily get their Great Reset.
White people are being racially profiled.
The ability to believe and trust.
They've told you to come because Tommy Robinson's here. Unfortunately, people coming out of university are not actually covering these sorts of things.
The presentation of the news obviously has changed, and supposedly for the better.
Taxpayer-funded freebies that we give to illegal immigrants.
I'm not sure that I do always believe everything. I don't feel so confident as I used to.
First legal election prediction market enhances democracy.
You can make money off of it. Markets don't lie.
I think you've got to question everything.
Of course, you and I knew that for a long time.
I feel like it's a bit embarrassing to say that you get your news from Instagram, but I do get a lot of my news from Instagram.
Off Instagram.
Instagram.
Television, mostly.
Probably the primary one is Facebook.
A surprising source of news for some people, but for me I quite like it also is on YouTube. People can create their own accounts independently, create their own videos, and then it allows them a bit more of freedom.
Yeah, my ratio definitely leans more towards seeing it on social media because it is convenient. But if I'm interested in something and I've seen a story, I will do more research around it.
I tend not to delve too deeply into the news.
I mainly get my news from the BBC. I have my notifications on for that.
If I look at Al Jazeera or Middle East Eye, then I can see kind of, a slightly different perspective perhaps.
For me, that's the most valuable part for me is a diversity of sources.
Because Instagram is so dopamine boosting via swipe based, I felt what I was reading never fully went in.
The essence of social media is it's quick, it's snappy, and you can see a quick headline which can sort of inform you about the news, what's going on in the world.
A lot of people seem very, fallible or gullible, where they can be persuaded by the first news resource that gets to them. Content which is designed to make you angry or outraged at something that's taking place. And the issue is someone like me who's got the time and the acumen to go through content and filter it out and work on my own algorithm. Children especially will be very disadvantaged and very prone to it.
I remember I was 16 and it was around the time that Brexit was sort of proposed, and then all of a sudden there was quite a lot of headlines online, on TV, in newspapers.
I think that exposed a lot of people, a lot of politicians, journalists and sources as quite biased because that was quite a divisive issue.
And so lots of people just were misinformed and then made this huge decision with the wrong facts, with the wrong information. I think it has an impact on our democracy as well.
People were very happily misconstruing facts. I mean, the most famous thing that happened, which is relevant for my research too, was back then Joel Cox, the MP, was killed by someone on the far right. If we didn't have Brexit, if we didn't have so much media division, I would argue that would not have happened because the man who did it, a lot of the content and literature was found in his home was very much of that nature. It was quite clearly someone who'd been pushed down a far-right narrative over a period of time. And then the end result of that is that poor MP was murdered.
Yeah, I think I do trust the news to be informed, but I think I try and look at it a bit more critically. Some organisations have political agendas and try and act like they don't, and they act like they're impartial and they make it sound very kind of clinical and newsy, but I think they are still quite effectively controlling the narrative.
The news is there for us to find out about what else is going on in the world, and that's what the programmes are full of.
You can identify fairly easily the more left-leaning and more right-leaning sources. The healthiest approach I have is always to have that pinch of salt approach where this news has been reported by someone for some reason in a certain context, and I find that helps you not take things for granted and keep that open mind, which I think is essential.
I know when I worked in court, I was working with a defendant who had been on the news, and on the news he was portrayed as somebody really, really awful, and actually when I was in the courtroom it was completely different. So from that moment I learned not to trust the news.
Even though they might be reporting on an event that is a news event, the language that they use can portray it in a certain way and puts a different lens on it.
When you have the responsibility of feeding nation news, especially international news, you should not use that power that you have to manipulate so blatantly the opinion of the people.
I think I used to just think that news was facts, and now I think more and more different news outlets have an agenda. GB News might tell a story very differently to the BBC, who might tell it differently to Al Jazeera.
It is difficult when sometimes a couple of people within an organisation create this kind of institutionalised bias. So a biased reporter within the BBC does not mean the entire BBC is biased. However, it does raise questions around their authenticity and the ethical nature of their work.
Even when you think, I really think this is right and I believe it, it feels more like a belief than a fact. And then, just in conversation with people, they might have a different opinion based on a different fact. It sounds a little bit conspiracy theory. So then you start doubting everything.
Not being honest is corruption, and that makes people a lot of money. And it's very obvious what political side that messaging is coming from, of like, migrants are stealing our jobs. But they're not. We live in a corrupt system. But it's people who publish magazines that benefit off pushing out those stories.
I think it's very easy to try and lay blame to people for who is at fault for news on social media. There is no one sole person. I think we as a society have made it a problem.
I suppose the reporters report on what is happening. So the producers and the directors and the editors, as to what we actually get to hear and what we get to see. They're responsible ultimately for the programme that is produced.
How it can be improved. I think the media do need to do better. There are things that are just black and white facts, but then a lot of stuff can be seen in a different light. You can't just put a blanket ban on everything. It needs to be quite nuanced. I think it's quite complicated.
In a really fractured sort of political world that we live in at the moment, it's not as easy as just, when they post a headline, people read that and see it the same way they do. Media is subjective.
Something like the BBC is a nice kind of idea. There was that kind of universality that as a nation, that's how we all got our news, and then we formed our opinions accordingly. The idea of having independent news outlets really opens up the field, and it allows different voices to be heard.
So I personally like to look in areas where there's more citizen journalism, where it's actual experiences and it's people that are on like ground zero.
I might look at like The Guardian and Navaran Media and Double Down News. People on the right are using GB News and I don't know what else. Then I think that is then when we get really polarised, because we're not even getting our news from the same place.
The price of groceries, the rent you pay, the state of your roads, or just to worry about the future direction of the country in general. And I find, well, no matter which political party you belong to, those tend to be core issues that come up.
So in real life, if I meet people and we're having a real conversation and they have different views, there's so much common ground that I think those conversations are actually really, really nice to have, even if I don't change their mind and they don't change my mind.
When we look at the interventions in my research, the practitioner talked about, a lot of it was getting in there, getting to know usually a young person, unpicking the ideology, unpicking what they're going through, how they're making sense of the world, and then trying to add information to that to give them more of a complete picture.
If we just sit and listen and stop trying to fix everything and just listen to people and their problems, there won't be so much more emotional tension online.
A lot of work I see in the community locally really gives me hope as well. I consciously remind myself that most people are actually good people. People just out litter picking, people cleaning up streets, just small but significant things. I think when people begin the day by looking at news content, which is very much negative, to be isolated, to be alone, staring at a screen, that will have an impact on your mental health at the very least.
We should share stories of very heavy things that are going on. I think we should also share stories of the joyful things that are going on collectively.
Even though we've opened this Pandora's box, maybe we can regulate it and find ways to keep our children safe. And I wouldn't want, an outright ban of any of this, because I do think the dialogue and the amplification of diverse voices, I think that's really beneficial to us. Yeah, putting my phone down, definitely going out to my allotment, getting my hands dirty and growing things, that feels very therapeutic and calming.
When you're standing atop a mountain, there's very much a literal grounding, but also a reality check from that, because you recognise how small you are in the world, in the universe, the sort of the beauty of nature, and thinking, well, this needs to be preserved. This should be our priority, not some political agenda, not some personal gain, not billions of pounds, but actually looking after the literal ground we walk on.
There are so many young people making changes, people in different fields, different careers. It makes a difference because they are familiarising themselves with other points of view, so that at some point, if there is issues in the world, people can actively make change rather than just getting angry online.
I like to be there to be as helpful or as supportive, and let them get on with theirs and they let me get on with mine, and like that to ripple out across the whole of the globe.
When I say goodbye to my friends, I send them off with love, because I don't know when I'll next see them. Say good morning to people when I'm out in the morning, and I say thank you to strangers, because in a world where you can be anything, be kind.